Once upon a time, there was a man who decided to marry his daughter. This is the opening of a shocking number of fairy tales. From all around the globe, creepy dads truly unite us as a people. Today I'm sharing an Italian version of this strange fairy tale type, the roller coaster ride known as Doralice.
Fucked up fairy tales with Liz. Ding!
Longtime followers will say, Liz, this sounds awfully familiar, and that's because it has somehow become my tradition for my TikTok anniversary to share one of these daddy-daughter tales. Here we are, year 3, celebrating this incestuous fairy tale, and I gotta say, I love it. This leaves me with a lot of things to work out in therapy, but for now, on to the fairy tale. Once upon a time, there lived a man named Tibaldo, and he was a real fucking piece of work. Interestingly, our narrator starts out this 16th century fairy tale with very sympathetic words for Tibaldo. Roughly paraphrased, it goes, "Too bad this guy had such a hot daughter, otherwise he wouldn't have ended up in this mess." Too bad for her, you mean, right, buddy? Too bad for her? See, Tibaldo's wife had recently died and made a very awkward deathbed wish.
"My darling, I beg you, please do not remarry, unless you can find a woman who fits into my wedding ring."
Of course I will do this, my dear, but why the odd request?
"For funsies."
Turns out wifey had one of those Cinderella rings that just didn't want to fit any other lady. Tibaldo and his grown daughter Doralice were discussing this quandary when our terrible tale really takes off. I don't know why you're having trouble finding a woman who can fit mom's ring. I mean, it fits me fine. See? This innocent act really stuck in Tibaldo's craw, and his next move was a serious bummer. "Doralice, since you are the only young woman that fits your mother's ring, and because I prefer hot ladies to uggos, you and I are gonna get hitched." "Well, Father, knowing your temper and your treatment of women, I'm gonna say no comment." Doralice stress moonwalked out of there as fast as she could, and she confided in her best ally, the old nurse who'd raised her. "Okay, well, my first idea is get the hell out of here." "That was also my first idea, but you know the way Dad is. He's like a dog with a boner." Ah! Fuck! That was the worst Freudian slip I could have made in this situation. "You're right, that was a terrible slip. And your father will relentlessly track you down. Perhaps we should hide you in plain sight. What about your mother's old trunk? You think I should hide in a trunk?" "Yes, I do, but only for a little while, you know, until we think of a better plan." "But I'll suffocate." "We'll put some tiny air holes in it." "But I'll starve." "I'll give you this bottle of booze that I just happen to have. It has the power to give you an entire month's nourishment with just one sip at a time." "But I'll cramp up in there." "With that flexible young body, you'll be fine. Besides, consider the alternative." "Good point. Let's do this." The nurse got Doralice set up in her hiding spot, and it worked for a long time. Tibaldo had no idea where his daughter had disappeared to. Doralice must have had patience and imagination like no other. Because even if she had the physical toll worked out, she still had to spend months in a fucking trunk. Liar. Lyric. Live. Okay, that's all the L words I know. Let's start with M. Ma. Mab. Macaroni. Macaroni's plural. Master. Masturbate. Masturbation. Oh, maybe I should do that. In the meantime, Tibaldo was so angry that Doralice had escaped and foiled his plan that he couldn't bear anything that reminded him of this issue, including the old trunk, which he had a merchant consign. The nurse was rather happy with this outcome and said a little prayer that Doralice would end up with a nice family far, 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 far away. The trunk made its way overseas and eventually ended up with a British king named Janice. The king kept the trunk in his bedroom, and it turns out he was quite the playboy. Doralice heard every single tawdry thing that went down in his sheets. But she was not put off by this because, sounds like this guy really knows what he's doing. Maybe I should get the fuck out of this trunk and find my happily ever after. So that's what Doralice did, but only after she was sure Janice had left for the day. She began doing the Snow White thing where she cleaned up his room after he'd gone. But she also gave it a little feminine touch, strewing rose petals and violets all around the room that she got from, who fucking knows, the balcony window, I guess? And the young and handsome King Janice really appreciated this effort. Mother, ladies of court, I just wanted to thank whoever of you is turning over my room so beautifully each day. None of us have been doing that. Intrigue. So Janice circled back from his hunting trip the next day a little early to spy through the keyhole of what was going down. When he saw Doralice, he was instantly hot for her, and he ran inside to stop her just as she was climbing back in her trunk for the night. Beautiful maiden, please do not lock thyself in thine trunk. Rather stay a little while and tell me all about yourself. Well, my name is Doralice, and I am the daughter of a very important man, but after all this time stuck in a trunk, that's all I can remember about him or me. Well, that sounds very traumatic. Follow-up. Thoughts on marrying me? She said yes, and they promptly had 2 children. Unfortunately for Doralice, her father was about to catch wind of her whereabouts, and time had only increased his thirst for vengeance. Tibaldo had been stewing about Doralice's escape from his gross clutches. Eventually he did piece together that she may have been in the trunk he sold, so he disguised himself as a merchant and infiltrated the local trade. He eventually met up with the guy who'd consigned the trunk, and that guy led him to the buyer. Tibaldo shipped off to England, still with his merchant disguise. He established himself in Doralice's kingdom as a fine seller of spinning goods, and eventually made it to see Queen Doralice herself. Doralice didn't recognize him, and 0 red flags waved when this faux merchant named the price for a purchase. Well, your highness, you can take whatever you like for free, as long as you let me sleep in the same chamber as your children for 1 night. How does that sound, governor? I don't know, Doralice, this seems like a bad idea, no matter who the man standing in front of you is. But Doralice, despite having gone through a very similar trauma of her father wanting to sleep with her, just says, okay. Now, Doralice did have some ladies on her staff who were a little more savvy. One of them had the idea to drug Tibaldo's wine to make sure he slept through the night. Unfortunately, Tibaldo himself was very savvy, and he just dumped that wine out when no one was looking. That night, Tibaldo stole a dagger from the queen and used it to murder her own children. He slipped the bloody dagger back into its sheath, and then he donned another disguise to go hide out in town. When the children were discovered slain, and the bloody weapon was found among Doralice's belongings, it was assumed that she was the murderer. Now, normally I would say that her having the murder weapon is pretty damning evidence. But is it also not pretty suspicious that a random dude asked to sleep in the chamber of the children who died that night, and then he disappeared immediately? But I don't know, in this kingdom they weren't too worried about that. They decided to bring in an astrologer to figure out what went down. Astrologer who I have never met before, tell me at once, who murdered my children? The murderer is hiding the bloody weapon in her bedroom. Of course, the astrologer was Tibaldo in disguise, and King Janice needed no other evidence to condemn his wife Doralice to a torturously long death. Queen Doralice is to be buried up to her neck, so that the vermin and mice and worms may eat her alive. And how did Doralice react to this insanely cruel and torturous punishment? Well, husband, seeing your temper and your treatment of women, I'm going to say no comment. Comment, girl! For the love of God, comment! Tibaldo returned home and gleefully shared with the old nurse that his daughter was being tortured and killed. Old nurse did right by her girl, though, and she promptly left Tibaldo's employ and hurried off to Old England. And when she got in front of King Janice, she made a big old passionate speech. Your Majesty, these ancient tits are the very ones that nourished your wife, the Queen. So believe me when I tell you she is an innocent woman. Once you hear the whole story, you will regret the cruel punishment you have levied upon her. And if you find I'm lying, you may dig a hole right next to her and punish me the same way. The old nurse told the whole terrible tale of Doralice's gross engagement and her escape via the old trunk. All right, I believe you, and I do want to free my wife, but also I promised some bloodthirsty violence to the people, so I think we're going to have to deliver. Janice had Tibaldo brought to court and put him on the rack to get a confession out of him. And then, unlike a lot of these dad wants to marry his daughter fairy tales, Tibaldo was punished. They tortured him with red-hot pincers, had him quartered, and threw his flesh to the dogs. As for Doralice, her and her hubby had a bunch more kids, and they lived happily ever after, though if I were her, I'd get back in that trunk. The end. Thanks so much for being a part of my fucked up fairy tales journey. It's been a real fun 3 years. As thanks, I'm giving away a copy of Maria Tatar's The Classic Fairy Tales, annotated. Tatar is one of the best fairy tale scholars and translators in the world of folklore. In this book, she leads readers through 26 favorite fairy tales, each notated with information on the history of each story, as well as its cultural impact. To enter this giveaway, simply make sure you're following me, and leave a comment telling me how you would pass the time stuck in a trunk for months on end. I'll pull a winner on March 1st. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next year of Fucked Up Fairy Tales. If we last that long. Every year that goes by, my old lady boobs are more and more realistic.